welcome to session 3 and welcome to Mary Wallace and Kim Gray. We're here to talk about the world of domestic retail and what we can learn from that world. As we all know, travel retail itself is going through a fairly traumatic time at the moment, and to a certain extent you could argue that domestic retail has been experiencing over a longer period of time, perhaps less abruptly, but over a longer period of time, a sense of evolution and change in response to new consumer mindsets and behaviours. So with you guys here to talk to us about your experiences about domestic retail and the understanding of the bridge, if you like, that we can make between learnings there to our world in travel retail, we're very fascinated to hear your thoughts and ideas today. So let's start with that question. I'll direct this one to yourself, Mary, there, if I may. This idea of what we can learn from the high street, what do you think we can learn?
Well, I think there's some common areas between travel retail and the high street and some differences as well. So, for example, some of the challenges in common are a criticism where people say everywhere looks the same on the high street. It's the same brands offering the same products. And often the shopper and the traveller gets really confused. You know, I could be anywhere. I'm not really sure where I am because it's all the same brands. One of the big mistakes on the high street was that we thought bigger is better, and that a monochrome set of universal brands could serve every need. They're all owned and controlled by the same large companies, and we mistook that for the consistency. That could provide the consumer and the economy with the things we thought were convenient. And actually, what happened is I couldn't distinguish what high street, what town I was in. You know, what looks like consistent pricing, for instance, so I think something is cheap, is actually hiding the real cost and the real value. And what happened is people just got confused or bored, distracted, stressed, and they thought that they could find something better, in air quotes, or the newest thing or the cheapest thing somewhere else, or they just stopped buying. And actually what we've learned now is that that's not really what people want. They want different things. They want to recognise the place that they're in. They want to see its personality and its quirky bits and the people. And that in turn gives you the special flavour, the character of what's on offer in terms of shops and services. And actually, I think one of the myths about retail is that a big, large company they're the only ones who can give you that convenience that a modern shopper wants. I mean, especially during COVID, what we've just discovered that isn't really true. What actually happened on the high street, it was the smaller local shops that stepped up, especially when the big supply chains went down or the website of the big brands melted. Actually, it was the high street that supplied what we needed when we needed it. And actually, it managed to scale because of things like readily available technology, collaborating across local partnerships and ecosystems to enable things like delivery. So that's one challenge. And then another challenge, and I know this is true of lots of different types of retail, is that I can get it cheaper online. And often that's the reason or the excuse that a shopper does not buy from a physical store when they walk in, or they don't buy from you. And that's something that can actually also happen to a shopper at an airport, because they're tired, they don't want the stress of a brightly lit store, or they're actually doing that strange travel maths where you're trying to work out what the price really means. We've all been there.
Yeah.
But that notion that cheaper is better is also being opened up, and it's revealing that actually that's not really true in many cases. And as consumers and as traders, we're rethinking what price and value really mean, partly because what we've been through in the last 6 months. Also, there is a recession about to happen. So that notion of it's cheaper online, it also actually has consequences. So things like the price I pay online, actually there's a load of other hidden charges like delivery costs, or it takes longer to get to me, or actually I get bombarded with cookies wherever I go around the internet, or I get loads of emails or text messages that I don't want because I've accidentally signed up to the marketing. Or there's another price to pay, which is actually, and this is quite a cold hard fact, if we don't use the shops that actually provide good range, great service, and something different, then we'll lose them. It's use it or lose
Right.
it. And one thing we have learned in retail is not to get too distracted by that word experience.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just provide something that's shiny and fun and then not have the shopper actually buy from you. If there isn't a reason for them to buy and there's no services around that to support making that purchase really easy and good value as well as fun, then they are just going to walk away and go, well, that was nice. And they'll click on Amazon or they'll go onto Quidco or whoever to get their cash back,
Right.
and they'll buy it direct from the brand.
Right.
So while there's plenty of goodwill from the consumer, as retailers, we need to continue to have a great offer at the core, a convenient way to buy, get the goods to the shopper and give them a reason to come back, but also combine that with fresh thinking, fresh talent,
Yeah.
new ways to do business. And if I can just finish up on some of the differences, actually one of the things the high street is really good at is enabling that space between brands and producers and consumers. So not just providing product, but providing that connection, information, education, all those other things that aren't about a physical product on a shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess a challenge for travel retail, especially airports, is how to make that happen, especially when the sense of time is different to what I might have on a high street.
I'm going to ask the same question of Kim, and we'll come back to those, Mary, because there's a lot to drill into there. But Kim, just into the same point, what can we learn from domestic retail and the high street, do you think, in our travel retail world?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot to learn, actually, as you kind of alluded to at the beginning. We're really seeing an acceleration of what is been happening in the high street in the airport world in real time. And one of the problems that we've had in travel retail is that we haven't necessarily had that burning platform to make as many changes or as to be as innovative as the retail, the high street retail landscape has had to be, which is, I wouldn't wish this on anyone, but this is now the opportunity to start making those changes because we have that kind of real drive to do so. And I think, to Mary's point about everything looking the same, being very homogenous, I entirely agree. It's been a real issue that we have had on both the high street, but also in a travel retail world. And I think one of the ways that the high street has started to really make a change to that is to create more flexible spaces. So spaces that can be used in different ways, that can be flipped and turned and changed to create that excitement. And they've started to be much more successful in that. And I know the pushback is in the travel retail world is, that can be expensive, or some of our brands will not want to do that. And I think one of the good examples is Tiffany, for example, has started to create these great kind of low-cost fit-out, but very, very well executed units that allow them to really showcase their brand in a different way and bring in new customers and a new demographic to them. I also think that there's something that we can learn from the high street on what not to do is possibly what I would call the Disneyfication of street food. So I think it's a great concept. Everyone wants those small format, interesting food experiences, moving away from some of those bigger prime operators. But what we've seen in the street food market on the high street is we're not quite getting what we want. It is expensive. It's not really authentic, and it's something that we can look at and think about ways that we can make sure that we don't do that in a travel retail space. And one of those ways is investing in those food and beverage spaces ourselves as a travel retail operator. So, and that gives you greater control to be able to bring in those truly authentic, great chefs without that kind of Disneyfication of that experience. So yeah, they're just a couple of points that I would think about from a street perspective.
Well, I'm going to pick right up there in this idea of Disneyfication, because this sense of, it's linked to, if you like, to this idea of there's something quite bland, there's something quite vanilla that people don't really enjoy, versus there's something else which is much more, to use the language, authentic, real, there's real people, there's real passion and so on. Do you think that the domestic market or high streets and shopping malls are getting better at sort of understanding how to make something feel more real and feel more genuine and feel more authentic? Is that a direction that they're going in and good at doing? Question of Mary.
Yeah, I think that's a place where the high street really excels when it's done well. So it's kind of what I was saying before. As a shopper, I want to see the local personality of that town or that place reflected back at me. So I get a sense of place and a sense of time. I can hear what's happening. I can taste the local food. Even the town has its own smell, which can change according to the time of day. It's a real multi-sensory experience. And that's something that an airport can obviously really struggle with. If I talk to someone at an airport, can I find some great places to go in that town? What's the best way to get there? Who serves the best version of the local cuisine? How do I pronounce it? All those tiny little interactions that are actually the real gems that the tourist guide won't tell you. The local accent, for instance. It's all of those quirky edges that make a place special. And I think there was a word that just came up, actually, control. And I think that's really, there's a kind of fight between authentic and control. And for obvious reasons in an airport, there has to be more control, if you like, than in a high street. Lots of obvious reasons there. But I think if we come back to the consumer, the traveller, in an airport, as a human being, I feel like there's very little I can control. There's very little I can have input into compared to a high street where I'm getting that sense of a real place, the authentic, and I can move at my own pace and I get a sense of place. And I'm a contributor to that community.
Yeah.
So I guess the challenge there is it whose definition of authentic is it? Because one thing that's happening in high streets is local producers and local food systems and services are much more involved in bringing, certainly in F&B, that onto the high street, compared to an airport where, frankly, what I'm seeing is it's the same names, kind of dressed up a little bit fancier, So what do I see, touch, feel, taste, hear, smell when I go through that airport?
So do you think it sounds like... Exactly. So in the sense that it's about how you deliver something, right? So the sense if you go for a master concession and you just change a few names and a few colours, it makes it feel local. That tends to be what happens in the airport world. Whereas maybe what you're saying is that in domestic side, what's happening is that commercial teams are getting better at understanding how to find those little gems, to work with those operators, to professionalize them if they need to be professionalized, and bring it into their centers.
Yeah, and I think the key thing there is in an airport, it can sometimes be something that is done to me, but on the high street, very often, good ones, it's done with and for. Right. So there's a real difference there that I think is worth unpacking.
So Kim, what do you think then to this idea of, I think to Mary's point there about this idea of control, and a lot of commercial teams in airports particularly like to have a very managed, very staged, very controlled, very kind of regularized product, if you like, and experience. It's very predictable to them, and it makes life comfortable, shall we say, than having, say, 15 independent street food operators, each with their own character, personality, and so on. That might be more interesting to the consumer, but it's kind of more difficult to A, find, and B, manage, and so on. So are there lessons that we can learn between, what thing we think a consumer would like to experience and what kind of a commercial team would like to sort of have an ease of operation, if you like?
Yeah, so it is a huge challenge in the kind of airport world to have that kind of level of flexibility within the space. You have significantly, as Mary said, higher, more onerous kind of security and logistics challenges, wider opening hours, extended hours, which can be quite difficult for some of these smaller operators to deal with. But I think and I think that there's always going to be a balance. So you'll want to have a mix of kind of those larger national brands that are very slick operations that have a great clarity of offer. So from an international perspective, you just know exactly what you're going to get every time. And then you can segment the offer to create those smaller aggregated spaces where you can bring in those more authentic brands. So it's not about flipping the whole offer to those smaller independent teams. It's about creating that. And you know, I said it earlier, but is the most fundamental thing will be the airports having to take a step forward in terms of providing capital, assisting with operations and logistics, and working out a system that works for all of them, because each of those smaller operations will not have the capabilities to be able to do that. Yeah. So it's about setting up those systems, and once those systems are in place, I see this is going to be a great source of income. So it's not just that it's going to be a great offer for the customer, it'll genuinely be a very good source of income for the airport as well, because you're able to do it in a quite a cost-efficient way, because you've created a sort of a community offer of the back-of-house services.
So I've been interested to hear your thoughts on how domestic and high streets are sort of evolving to work with e-commerce. You know, so we've got this similar kind of threat, if you like, happening in travel retail. E-commerce is just growing as a behavior in consumers and a mindset in terms of using it as a channel, moving between physical and online channels. So how can we learn from the domestic side about a world with e-commerce?
Well, to be honest, the word e-commerce for me doesn't really have any relevance anymore. It's more around, I'm going to use a word now that I think is overused, but I'll use it anyway, democratization of retail. I think that's what it really comes down to. So what I mean by that is taking a step back from the traditional view of retail, especially travel retail, as I said before, because the consumer wants to see something different. And also, really, a lot of the innovation and excitement and new business models, they're happening at the smaller high street independent end of the market, where those companies are, where they are using e-commerce as part of an overall new retail proposition. It's a real sea change in how to approach commerce as a whole. And I think what those clever, sparky people have done is they've actually kicked against the prevailing voices in retail, who maybe tend to separate, you know, here is my shop, here is my e-commerce, here is my marketing. You know, I have 30 years experience in retail and I've been director of this, therefore I know everything. Well, actually you don't, because look at what has happened and is happening in retail. They've done the same thing for 30 years, 100 years. And actually these really brave retail upstarts, if I can call them, they recognise that the consumer doesn't give a monkeys about channel or about your job title. They want that something different, but they want something useful that actually makes their life and, you know, the life of their community better. So actually, I think those new kids on the block are using technology to the advantage. They're doing things like they're setting up completely new retail brands and shops, or creating new ways to do the operational stuff, like, as Kim was saying, you know, renting a shop space, setting up a brand that actually maybe doesn't even need a permanent physical store, going direct to the consumer. And they're completely redefining what a shop is anyway. And the reason they're doing that is they're listening to shoppers, I mean, really listening, because they still are shoppers. They are not 12 steps removed, like a lot of the hierarchy is. And where you've got that new relationship, so you've got a shopper that's looking for something new and better, you've got a new kind of retailer, they're both equipped with technology, and they're both stepping in as equal partners into that new relationship. And that is where I think you get something really powerful and interesting and profitable, because the value exchange is based on a much more even relationship.
Right.
It's an equal footing. And I think that, for me, is the sweet spot.
So Kim, to that point, do you think then, again, it's another opportunity learned from domestic, if you like, to say, okay, it's about that curation of our the brands we work with, the tenants, if you like, and the concepts and the concessions. that we can look to a broader portfolio which includes these new kids on the block, as Mary says, or these more new businesses with new ideas, fresh ideas, which may be sort of more are behaving in a way which people find more relevant as shoppers. They're more in tune with that new shopper, that new mindset, that new behaviour. Is that an opportunity for travel retail?
It is. I'm slightly hesitating because, slightly contrary to one of Mary's earlier points, is in many respects airports are, I believe, slightly more space constrained. We do have space, but from a financial perspective, there's a lot of pressures from a pure productivity perspective, and it can be quite risky to bring in some of these smaller players when you're really focused on a square meter productivity perspective. Now, I don't agree that focusing on a square meter productivity perspective is the right way to think about it, but the challenge is changing the minds of people in those organizations to make the move across. And that's where, again, you can tell that I'm quite interested in at the moment, this idea of aggregators, right? So you don't have to deal with each of these little brands by themselves. It's about creating spaces that can host multiple brands that can be managed as one unit rather than necessarily 5 or 6 individual units. So I think that that's probably the way that we would have to do it. And I think it's about taking a risk about these, what I would call, flexible white spaces that we can start to use to bring in those more innovative upstarts and brands. And they have shown great success where they've been applied. It's just getting over the kind of initial reluctance to take that 5-7 year long-term deal that provides that kind of consistent ongoing income. Now, the interesting thing is, though, some of the things that you've just mentioned around the mutual success is a very common way of looking at things in airports. So in terms of a minimum guarantee and a revenue share, it's really about mutual success. So that is not a foreign concept in airports, and that is something that will certainly translate really well from the domestic offer into airports, that mutual success factor.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of interesting points there. I think I want to pick up on one of those, this idea of a mantra, if you like, around the future of retail is to be experimental, to take risk. The idea that copy-pasting the past into the future is not the answer. We need to find the new answer, if you like, so you're going to have to take risks. And I think, Kim, you made the point there that there's a kind of clearly a commercial focus on being careful about not taking too much risk. But nevertheless, this idea of does the domestic market sort of accept that it has to experiment more, it has to try more things out, it has to fail quickly and move on, if you like. And is that something that perhaps travel retail needs to get used to as a way of doing business in the future? More risk-taking, more experimentation, and no guarantees of success, if you like. And the word is in minimum annual guarantee is a kind of an expression of a culture of we want guarantees, we don't like risk. So do you think we need to sort of learn from that habit of experimentation? Mary?
Oh, right, okay. Definitely, yes. I mean, that's entirely where all of retail, from independent up to the big boys like Estee Lauder Group and L'Oreal, they're all doing that. And they're all, and Kim, I take on board the point you were just saying about how space is used. One of the classic kind of metrics of retail has always been the square meter. One of the issues has been we didn't start with the consumer. We started with, what does this square meter give us? And actually, now that physical and digital really have come together, that metric is like, well, what does it actually mean? Is it useful anymore? If you look at some of the experiments that have been done, so I'll pick on a sector like beauty, because obviously it's a huge thing for travel retail. If you look at some of the pop-up experiments, especially around, say, the Covent Garden area of London, for instance, which is a big beauty space, if you'd said 10 years ago Chanel would do an experimental pop-up, or a Lauder Group company, or here's another one, or a brand that has no physical space, like Cult Beauty or Feel Unique. So a direct-to-consumer aggregator who exists online would open several physical pop-up spaces, which would see people queuing at 6 a.m. in the morning around the block for 3 days on the trot to get their hands on the range, the curated range, and hero products that you couldn't get anywhere else. Now, we would have gone, well, hang on a minute, how are you measuring that? And the answer to that is, we measure it in sales because we're retailers. Everything else, how much do we care? Are we looking at sentiment and goodwill and buzz and online conversation and all of the other stuff as well? That's where we are. That stuff isn't even risk and experiment anymore. These are things that are measurable. And another way that we know is successful is that some of the brands I mentioned are fighting off big brands who go, how do I be a part of it? If you think of things like all the beauty kits that have just been launched this week, Space NK, Liberty, etc., beauty advent calendars in this sector, these are hero things that generate so much consumer attention, participation, and purchase that have resonance. Where is travel retail in beauty in these big things that are happening now? They're not really anywhere. So those important things to brands and to consumer and to retailer outside of airports are not happening in an airport.
Right.
So those are the areas that we can unpack, I think.
Okay. Kim, I can see you want to come in on that.
Jump in there for a second. You've made an excellent point, which is all these big brands that are massive in airports, so all these big cosmetic and beauty brands are on the high street incredibly innovative and are really driving those different ways of shopping and experiencing the brand. Why are they not doing that in airports? I'll probably get myself into trouble, but it's because...
Go ahead, Kim, go ahead.
It could be a career ender for me, but it's because the aggregators that look after those concepts and brands don't have the flexibility within their spaces to create those spaces. And the deals and the offers that we have in airports really hamstring us in our ability to be flexible, to launch these new offers, to create those really innovative spaces. And I think, as an industry, we're going to have to think really hard about opening up the way that we approach these brands and how we bring them into the airports, or otherwise we're just going to have the same sort of slightly stale experience that we have today.
No, I think that's an interesting point, Kim. Certainly in our work, we talk about that difference between how a brand shows up on a high street or in domestic and how it shows up in an airport. Our point of view would be that it's a very diluted, shall we say, experience and becomes very generic from place to place in an airport. And brands, as you say, for some reason, the brands or the relationship or the partnership or something is preventing brands from really innovating or bringing all those amazing campaigns they do and all that innovative content that they have, which are assets they've already created, but for some reason they don't find their way into airports. So what is the way to break down that wall between domestic and travel retail? What do we need to do to break that down? Maybe Kim, you've got some insight on that.
I certainly think that some of it comes into our approach to leasing. So we're going to have to think a little bit more short term rather than long term deals. We're going to have to be bold and assign space to offers that we don't know what they're going to be in 18 months, 2 years time. So I think that's the only way that we can really start to make a change is to keep it open, to keep the space a bit more open for these offers to come in. Otherwise, it will be a glacial change because of the length of the deals and the risk around the income going out. But the risk from the other direction is if we don't start making those changes, we're just going to see income eroding over time. Mm-hmm. It's just going to, and it has been dripping down over time. and we're going to have to work a bit harder. It's as simple as that. You know, we can't do the one-off big deals. We need to be doing a lot more smaller deals and keeping it rapid and flexible.
That's a good point. So, Mary, I just want to come back to a very significant point I feel that you made earlier on around, you know, brands seeing the value of an activation beyond just pure transaction, if you like. Obviously, that's important and is a measure, one of the metrics of success, if you like. But this other idea that we can see value in other terms and we can measure value in other terms. Domestic, it seems, is moving in that direction, that understanding that it's not always just about transaction. We can be successful by understanding how many impressions or how many shares or how many new followers or how many likes and so on and so on. So this understanding of the if you like, the metrics of value and revenue. Can you talk to that point about what domestic is beginning to understand in that area?
Yeah, and I can give you a real example as well. So this is the Artery Art Shop in Banbury, right? The owner there, Barry, and I interviewed him for my podcast Home Ground during lockdown. So to your point, where does the income come from? If you've had to close your physical shop for whatever reason, bang, there's some income gone. So this is an independent trader, and what he did was he was already doing art classes, because it's an art shop, small ones for 5 or 6 people, the local community, in his tiny shop. He couldn't do that anymore. So what he did is he live streamed online art classes, learn to draw, learn to paint. He's a bit like the Bob Ross of Banbury. He had started with 200 people from around the world joining him for his art classes. That then translated into, obviously, product and brand awareness for him, but directly to sales. So he's still using his physical space. He's obviously limited in what he can do. He's generating a community, in this case, global. He's using readily available technology. People could, in the local town, could still order online from him. They could pick it up in somewhere that was allowed to open. So he's still got that physical income coming through. And he's now getting sales from Canada, you know, crazy places around, not crazy places, but places that you wouldn't associate with a small shop in Banbury. He's now an international brand because he thought, what am I good at? What do people want as well as the product on the shelf? They wanted education. They wanted to learn together, and they wanted that sharing of expertise and, you know, learning something together, that community. From all of those things, he's, you know, thankfully that he's still open, he's doing well. But that example is true of so many high street businesses that I've interviewed over the last few months. You know, how have you been managing when you can't open your physical space or you're very limited in what you can do? And every single one of them flipped really quickly. Like, who can I partner with in this town to help me with delivery or logistics or whatever it is? How do I get online? How do I make an app? How do I target people, the right people at the right time? All of those things they learned as businesses to do very quickly. And I will say they all had to change their mindset very quickly as well, in terms of, this maybe isn't for me. This is beyond my skill set. This is beyond how I usually do business. And they're all now thriving because they served a need. They got income through the door so they could keep trading. And they're now also branching into different things. So a common example would be a restaurant is now doing pre-prepared ready meals and delivering them to people at home who still aren't ready to come out. So they're finding alternative ways to create and sell product and to do business with new revenue streams. So it all starts with a mindset, back to your point, Kim. Those mindsets, if they're not changing now, then that's quite worrying. But they need to see that there is opportunity in this. There's more opportunity if you just think things through differently.
Right, so that's the Barry from Banbury effect is a fascinating...
Barry from Banbury, he's quite famous now.
A man to follow. I will check him out later on. But Kim, to this point, this understanding, there's a mindset and also a shift in understanding of my physical space is not the only place I can do business. My audience, if you like, my customer, I can reach them in many places and find a connection and add value to their lives in other ways. This is something that's happening in domestic, and it doesn't seem to be happening too much in travel retail, but is that something as an opportunity, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, It has certainly been something that has been incredibly slow to be picked up within the travel retail sector. And again, historically travel retail's done pretty well. So there hasn't been as big a drive to do it. But what this current situation has really demonstrated, and examples like Barry can be easily applied to the airports, is all these airport retail offers sit on huge logistics hubs. Very, very slick, very, very well operated logistics hubs. And the thought that we can't flip to, instead of servicing the air side, instead of serving the passengers, to turning that logistics on to sending things to home or home deliveries, and our ability to consolidate and these different types of brands, so multiple different brands into one package in our consolidation centres that many large airports have, is something that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of, if this was ever to happen again, how do we keep the wheels turning in times when we don't actually have the passengers in the building? Well, it's by leveraging our amazing logistics capability to just turn it the other direction and work as a consolidating unit back out to the public at home. So that's one of the ways that I think that we can really start to think about shifting in that kind of direction.
It doesn't feel to me like travel retail has enough Barrys in it. Is that? Would you kind of agree with that?
Is that for me?
Yes, Mary. Sorry.
I would absolutely agree with that. Not just because I'm a fan of Barry, but actually that's a really important point, because something we haven't talked about yet, which I really believe is the secret sauce to great retail, is the staff. It's the people you meet who help you, who serve you, who do a fantastic job, often under very difficult circumstances. Really, it's that that's going to probably, first of all, make me buy, and then secondly, make me come back to buy again, and hopefully multiple times. I'll remember that person. I'll remember the way that they interacted, maybe not just with me, but their team and the other people in the store. The extra little tiny bits of help that I get. And I genuinely believe that is the secret, because I think too often, and this isn't a criticism of any particular store or airport, I go in and although it's a human being serving me, sometimes I think, well, I could have got that, in a different way, and it would have been a bit nicer. This is not a clarion call for the robots to take over, by the way. I'm not a fan of that either.
Understood.
It's more to think about the technology aspect. Actually, where are places where we can add value by? Does a human being need to do this? First of all, is it quicker, better, more convenient for everyone if I can just get it somewhere else? And actually use the human beings, use the hugely talented, well-trained, skilled staff to really add value when and where it's needed. And it's those kinds of things that I think, should be a thing that airports and the brands within them should look at, because that's something you don't even need extra space for. You just need to spend some time with your staff and get them motivated, maybe different kinds of training.
Yeah.
All that good stuff that's already happening that maybe can just go to the next level.
And Kim, I can see you're nodding a lot to there, so you clearly agree with this point.
Yes, so I mean, all this technology does is enable us to allow our staff to have more time to give better service. It's not about getting rid of the staff, it's about enabling and freeing up their time to give great service to our customers. I know URW, we've got a very successful example in the Mall of Scandinavia of a VIP lounge where we've got highly trained staff that help our customers there to understand what is right from them from a vast range of offers. And that's about bringing in their digital purchases to this area, as well as the purchases that they make in the store, and creating that experience. And it's a huge success because there are real people who care, who are trying to help, who are reassuring and providing that great experience. But it's enabled by a great, digital service.
Could you put a revenue benefit to that in terms of what that adds to, in terms of real revenue in additional sales, that relationship that you create with the customer?
I don't actually know off the top of my head, I'm afraid, but it is significant. We saw a significant upside once that unit had opened.
Well,
and it's right in the prime retail space as well. It's not something that we've, as an afterthought, we've tucked away behind in a storeroom somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about domestic, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. From the people, the importance of people and the service aspects is obviously, and we would agree with that. And if you like, we understand the complexities of great sales associates or brand ambassadors, as they're popularly called also. In travel retail, there are difficulties of recruitment and retention. It always seems to be a difficulty. But if we look on the domestic side, we see great brands like Lush, Pret-a-Manger, Lush, the staff at Lush really they seem to love their jobs. They seem to love selling bath bombs. They're passionate about it. They seem to live the brand. Pret-a-Manger, you might be buying a sandwich for £2.50, but they make you feel like a human being for that one moment of transaction and so on. They seem to invest a lot in that. And Selfridges, just anecdotally told us, simply through personal shoppers connecting with consumers and being, if you like, creating a followship, they can generate £200,000 worth of sales virtually through those relationships. So it's kind of this idea that we're not sort of focusing hard, to your point, Mary, enough maybe on how we create what is that service experience, the new service experience that we can learn from domestic. And so where do you think the opportunities are in terms of making it happen? I mean, we can talk about it and we can talk about great experiences, but how do we ensure that, we can learn from somewhere and bring it into travel retail? What are they doing to make that happen, that great sales experience?
Well, I think we've touched on a few points already. So it's about looking at where are people spending their time, not just the shopper, but the staff. What are the things that we can take, the tasks that we can take away from them that they don't need to be doing, so they can physically spend more time with customers or on customer things. And actually, another thing I will say on that is a lesson I hope we've learned in domestic retail is that don't keep handing every 3 months a new strategy to your staff that literally they're then having to learn on the shop floor, and they're looking at an iPad or a clipboard going, what is it I need to do next? That's not, let them do their job. They're good at it. They should be. That's why you hired them, you trained them, and they brought their expertise to you. I will also just touch on a really great word that you both used, actually, which is enable or the enabler. So if we think about, for instance, technology and data being the enabler in new kinds of relationships that are more equal, more democratized, that can do great things, that actually starts to bring about other possibilities as well. So as well as bringing in more just actual revenue and profit through the door, you can start thinking about different business and revenue models, different ways that you use your brilliant staff across your business. Someone who works a lot on the shop floor has a lot to teach people who don't. So make sure that you're kind of mixing people across the business as well. And then I think you touched on it earlier, actually, as well. The connections that are across retail services, entertainment and media, education with a small e, so that we're not thinking of retail as that kind of monolithic standalone product on shelf transaction thing. We actually approach it in a different way, but it's one very important, valuable core aspect of a service or an experience that's combining lots of different things. Right. And that's of much more value and has much more resonance for everybody involved, for staff, for shoppers, for brands, for retailers, the local community. And that is actually, again, it's just good business, because you're creating those little sparks along the way that don't just generate kind of, good feelings. Yeah. It's other opportunities to sell and participate. Yeah. So why wouldn't you do that and get everybody involved?
That's an interesting point. And Kim, I'd like to bring you up in on that idea, this idea that it's not just about retail, it's not just about F&B. I mean, obviously in travel retail, the sense of non-aeronautical revenue is kind of core to it, is retail and F&B. In domestic, we're seeing a shift away from that sense of we need to diversify, we need to get GLA doing other things, co-working spaces, exhibition spaces, pop-up spaces, aggregated spaces, as you said. We're looking for different types of leisure, new types of leisure. So this idea of diversifying the commercial platform, if you like, to be less reliant on retail and less reliant on F&B, that's happening, or seems to be happening more and more in domestic. Is that something that you would agree with, and is something that we can sort of potentially look at as an opportunity?
Yeah, 100%. And I really think that there's two kind of areas that this is going in travel retail, and that we can see good examples within the domestic market. One is into the kind of experiential space. I think that's been talked about a lot. So I want to talk a little bit more about sort of more of a service-based approach. So what are the services that we can bring in that create a great experience and drive revenue into the travel retail spaces? And I think one of the it's kind of an obvious one, but it's like micro fitness. So over my entire career, everybody's wanted to get into more gyms into airports, more of that kind of experience in there. But it's been very difficult from an economic perspective to put them in a prime space, just from a way that works. And I think one of the trends that we're seeing is micro fitness. So, and I think that'll be a key target going forward. It's very difficult to implement a gym in an airport. You need to have, it's a very space hungry type of activity. If you think about where they are in malls or in high streets, they tend to be tucked away in the basement or in the roof structure somewhere. And there's really interesting brands like Peloton, like Mirror and Tonal, really, online technical brands that you can create these small but yet personal and intimate spaces that you can have a great kind of fitness experience, but it's a very, very low space constraint there. And I really think that's one of the directions that will go. And it's almost the flip, They have those in airports, and that is a great marketing activity for those brands to then sell to these passengers when they're at home.
Great. Have you got any thoughts on that, Mary? That diversification going forward?
Yeah, micro fitness, small bursts. I'm into that. Is it like micro pigs? We have to be careful that they don't grow into something much bigger. I think you've hit on something there, Kim, and I think the thing there is like making best use of the traveller and the shopper's time, because time in airports is obviously it's a different thing to when we're outside of an airport. So I think you're right there. Like, how can we reimagine how people spend their time in an airport and start from that perspective? So whether it's fitness, a Tai Chi class would work well. Again, going back to the beauty sector, because it's what I'm really interested in, we're seeing mini treatments. I saw a great example, I think it was last year, of people like Estee Lauder offering like a mini lip treatment or a face massage or an eye massage, something, an eye mask. 15 minutes before you get on your flight, you're a little bit refreshed. You've had a great brand experience. You've got a connection to maybe a specific product or promotion. And you've had a connection with a human being as well before you get on that plane. That's brilliant. That's the way we should be thinking, more savvy about time and space and what you can do within the obvious constraints as well. So I'm all for that, especially where it's around food or fitness or health and well-being, because actually people want to feel better in an airport, because it is a place where you can feel pretty stressed. So start from that perspective and see where you get to.
And health and well-being, we've talked about it for a while in domestically, but it's the next big thing in travel, I think, because it suits the time and the mood of those consumers in that space. And we've seen it. A lot of good examples of bringing these into our shopping malls. They're kind of proven entity there, so I don't think it's a big step to start bringing them in successfully into the travel retail spaces.
Great, thank you. Well, we're running out of time, so I'm going to give you one last teaser question. If there is one thing that you think you would like people to borrow from the domestic market when they think about their future airports and the commercial experiences, if there's one thing that you could take from domestic, what would it be? And I'll ask you first, Mary.
Oh man, I'm going to cheat. I'll use the word localism.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is sense of place and people that are around that location. And within that, I'd say, brilliant staff, brilliant product, brilliant offer that has a personality of the place and that human connection.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kim, what's the one thing for you?
Well, I'd say it's a little bit trite, but it's flexibility of design. So when you're creating these spaces in airports, think about how you can create spaces that are really flexible. It's the boring stuff, it's the utilities, it's the mechanical and electrical elements, so that you can rapidly change the unit much more quickly and much more cheaply and much more efficiently. That's the key thing I think I'd bring in. Brilliant.
Well, thank you. I've learned a lot. So I've been writing notes like crazy over here. And I'll carry that forward into our work. Sounds like a design brief for the future there, Kim, so that's really great. So thank you very much for your thoughts and being with us today. I'm sure the audience appreciated that as well.